What's going on, guys? In this one we're just getting a new garage workbench set up. We built one of these at our last place, but we just moved, so I wanted to get something new in this garage. I'm going to be building it very similar but with a few adjustments, and I'll kind of go over why I decided to make those. But we'll just jump right in. The biggest thing to know is every time you've got a new project, you got to make sure that you use it as an excuse to get a new tool. So I finally broke down and got myself a table saw. This would have been really nice on a lot of other projects. This was just the time I decided to get it. It make cutting down that plywood a lot easier. I don't recommend necessarily using this to cut down 2x4s, but again, I just got it, so we had to mess around with it just a little bit. Now the previous one I built, I made it 4 feet front to back and then 6 feet wide. The first major change I made on this one is that I just made it 3 feet front to back. I could reach all the way to the back of the 4-foot one, but I ended up just leaving stuff back there. Kind of ended up being a cluttered mess. And it was nice to have the extra room to put stuff, but I just didn't really want to have an excuse to not put things away and kind of shove it in the back and have it be out of the way. This way it also takes a little bit less garage space, but the 3 feet by 6 feet is still plenty of room. Underneath, we're just getting this frame built. This is obviously going to provide a little extra strength so I can add some extra weight on top of this without it folding or bending in any way. On the back edge, I'm going to be hooking up some hinges, but for the extra strength and support, I'll be screwing some 2x4s into the wall that table will rest on when it folds down. So because of that, I want the back end of this frame set right up against that 2x4 when it folds down. So I'm just using another 2x4 as spacing. We'll get a little bit of wood glue added as well for a little extra strength. And then I just use that 2x4 and the garage floor as kind of the flat surface so everything's lined up well. Once we got glue on that first side, I ran a couple screws into that. And then I laid it down, put a little extra wood glue across the rest of that frame. We put a couple screws in each side and then mostly use brad nails to hold that all together, because once that wood glue dries, it'll have a lot of strength to it. Now if you haven't noticed, this frame with the 2x4s is just a little bit wobbly. It's obviously not perfectly flat. Attaching the plywood definitely helped, but I'm going to put these weights on it so when I brad nail it down, hopefully that holds it a little bit more. But this is just what happens when you just get regular lumber from the store. It's not going to be perfectly straight. So this table did end up having a little bit of wobble in it. So you'll see how I kind of fixed that, made that work. Shouldn't matter too much by the time I get it up on the wall. Speaking of the wall, there it is. I decided to build this so it was just under 4 feet tall. I believe it was about 3'9". This isn't necessarily the height I would recommend for everybody. It's usually a little bit taller than what most desks and tables are. I'm just a little bit taller, so I like having the workbench up a little bit higher. Most folks that come by are like, wow, that seems like it's way too tall. But it's perfect for me, so just mess around with the height a little bit when you're making yours. Make sure it's comfortable for you, what you're going to be doing. You can reach across it, reach everything you need to do. I put 3 2x4s just across that back wall to save a little bit of wood, and then just made sure that those were screwed into the studs, so obviously you've got the extra added strength of those. For the legs, I just took 2 2x4s, screwed them together, just used 2 screws going in from each side, and then I used those to measure out the pocket that I'll build that those will slot into. This is the point where I remind you, if you're having a good time watching this video, feel like you're learning something, make sure to drop a like, hit that subscribe button, or if you're not feeling like either of those things, you could leave a hateful comment because that'll help me too. Second big difference I put in this table is instead of doing folding legs, I just made them slot in. I felt like that would make them a little bit more sturdy. On the last one I did it so they folded in and out. They were always hooked to the table. Whichever way you do, on the last one, I only hooked those with the bolt to the side of the table. I would make sure you have something on both sides that bolt can connect to. That way it's a bit more solid. With the bolts only connected to the one side of the table, the legs just ended up being a little bit wobbly, so that's why I built the entire box for that to slot into. Now getting this level was a little bit more difficult because my garage floor has a slope to it, so this left leg is going to have to be a little bit longer than that right one to make sure it's actually level and flat. So I'm doing this the jankiest way I can, holding up one side, kind of getting a level, just roughly guessing where that needs to be. The rough guess ended up just being a little bit off, but we remedied that by putting some shims just up right underneath the table, so that even though that leg is slightly the wrong length, it's still level when it gets put in there. So after making sure we got the shims the right size, we got that box built out, screwed onto the sides as well as into the top. And then I'm just going to throw some weights on top of this table because it does still have a little bit of wobble in it. That way it's getting held flat on both the legs and those 2x4s against the wall. And then I'm just getting these hinges screwed into the wall. This center one is going to be screwed straight to a 2x4. If you're wondering with these screws if I'm screwing it straight into the 2x4 that's already screwed into the wall, the answer is yes. That was poor planning on my part. I ended up having to Dremel those screws down, so they're a little bit shorter. They were still connected to the plywood, but they weren't screwed into the 2x4 connected to the wall. Once we got that fixed up, I got some drywall anchors punched into the wall. You might be able to get away with just screwing these straight into the drywall because when the table's up it is pulling straight down, but I didn't want to risk that since I'll be parking my truck on this side of the garage on occasion. Not spending the money on drywall anchors and having it fall on the truck one day just seemed like a really dumb idea and seemed like it would cost a lot more money. So we grabbed a few of those, got those drilled in, those hooked to the wall really nicely, and that's going to add a lot of extra strength for everything. Once I had all 3 hinges attached to the wall and to the table, all I'm doing here is adding a plywood spacer. That way I can get a little 2x4 up there that'll swivel down, and that'll hold the top of the table when it gets folded up. You'll see that here in a little bit. So once we got that put in, we're going to drill a hole through the table as well as the legs for the bolt to go through. Again, these aren't swiveling or anything, but I do want to be able to bolt the legs to the table, especially since the table's a little bit wobbly. Bolting the legs to it will add some weight, hopefully flatten that out a little bit too. So after a little bit of doing, we got that hole all the way through, and we can punch that carriage bolt all the way in. These don't need to be too tight when you screw them down, just tight enough that they'll stay in without popping out. It's still a bit wobbly even with the leg bolted to it, but we got both sides bolted down, and any sort of weight flattens out the table pretty good. Legs store like that pretty well. I'm going to smash my table saw, break that new tool in of course. You can see how everything kind of fits together here. If you haven't watched the other video of how I built the other one, the legs basically folded in. It was on wheels so you could wheel it away from the wall. But I decided to build it like this where the legs attach a little bit more solidly and it's hinged to the wall because I never really wheeled it around. I didn't like it moving on me. I just always wanted it right up next to the wall. And the legs folding was a nice feature, but I basically never had it folded up, so it made more sense to have them a little bit more solid without bumping around or moving in any way. We'll get you guys a little closer look here, but let me know what I missed on mine, what you did differently on yours. Always wondering how it can be improved. Always wondering if I missed something, some important feature that'd be super nice to have. So let me know what you guys think. Drop a comment down below, and thanks for watching.